can see it. Oh, here we are.
If you go into participants.
I've done it.
Oh, good.
I think.
We do have 5 votes for, including our external, which is sufficient.
Okay, thank you. So I declare that motion carried. And so now I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest that they may have in relation to any of the items on the agenda. Are there any? Thank you. And in terms of items not on the agenda, are there any? And we have no requests for public participation, so there is no public participants today. Just to make sure that we got all the admin right, I'm going to move that under Standing Order 2.4, temporary suspension of standing orders. The Council suspends Standing Order 27.7, division in order to allow the division be recorded by a show of hands rather than taking down names by the Chief Executive. And that's just as also we can't, if people can't vote via the participant list. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Condi. Please vote accordingly if you can.
It's unanimous, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move now through to general business. And this is the draft annual report format, including financial statements and proposed sign-off process. Before I move the motion, and Heidi, you might go to advise, should we ask for officers just to provide some background to this and answer any questions from members?
Yep, so you can introduce the paper and then ask for any questions, then move the motion and then ask if there's any debate.
Okay. Look, so so what I will do is I will move the motion based on the recommendations in the officers' report. Most of what we've got on the agenda is from a meeting that we were to have in March. We didn't have that meeting in March due to COVID-19. But this is one of those things that we look at every year, where we look at the annual report, how it's going to be structured. Obviously, there are legislative and accounting standard requirements that have to be taken into account. In the past, what we particularly focused on is this going to make it readable for people to review, for people with an interest in Wellington City Council, for our residents. So I will let officers just talk us briefly through. So I will move the recommendations in the officers' report. Do I move that now, Heidi, or do I wait for the?
You can ask if there's questions and then move.
Okay, I think that would be the better way. Andy Matthews, do you want to take us through this, or should it be Richard?
Yeah, look, thank you, Chair. Look, I'll just do a really brief introduction and hand it over to Richard. So this for councillors and members who are perhaps new to this committee, this is a standard process that we go through at usually a fraction earlier than now, but it's still timely at this time of year. Obviously, we deferred the meeting slightly of the Audit and Risk Committee. So effectively, what this paper does is deals with primarily the financial reporting aspects of the annual report format, And so the numbers that you see in there are not the current numbers. That's just, so they're just in there for formatting purposes. The purpose of this is so that if there's any questions that anybody has about how we're starting to format that financial content, we get them out of the way before we start dealing specifically with the numbers. So it's a rather technical piece, to be quite honest. But I'll hand over to Richard just to give you any indication of changes or otherwise in terms of what we're looking at around that format this year. Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Welcome, everyone. As Andy has put it, this is very much a format of what we try and do is agree the format and then worry about the numbers, and we'll go through the numbers later during workshops. So what we have here is, sorry, I'm going to look to the side just so I do have a paper copy of the old reports. So what we're doing is looking at the format that we present and get published. The feedback we've had from the Australasian Reporting Awards is that we've got a fairly reasonable format. It is technical, and it's always going to be technical. We can't do much about that. It's designed for experienced readers of financial statements. What we do try and endeavour to do at the front of the annual report in the summary section is explain it in a more user friendly manner for people who are not experienced at reading financial statements. We try and just pull out the key financial messages and put that at the front of the annual report. The other aspect in here is we provide a indicative timetable for the committee to consider. We have advised that this is still under the current situation, this is still doable, and so that's part of this paper is for council to adopt those timeframes. There will be one probably significant change to the report and to the financial sections, and that'll be around our response to COVID-19, where we think we'll insert a summary, a part in the summary document. There'll be a part in the performance measures, and obviously there'll be probably a very specific note in the financial statements, very much like we did with the earthquakes, where we had a particular note for that. I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
Sorry, Councillor Pannett.
Sorry, I just had to find myself to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Yeah. Hey, look, thanks for doing all this work, staff. That obviously it's heaps of work. So can I just drill down a little bit, Richard? Are we able to go a bit further? And here's a dummy's guide to this document. Reasonably comprehensive. I get that some of it has to be technical, and I presume really it's a legal requirement, isn't it? I doubt many people are going to read it. It is a legal requirement, and also we're governed by international accounting reporting standards as well. We do endeavour to put it into plain English as much as possible, but there are particular sections that are just very technical that even experts would struggle with some of those sections as well. But we do. That makes me feel better, Richard.
I think also, Councillor Pennant, that what we've tended to do in the past is instead of trying to do I suppose an extremely simplified version of something that is extremely complicated, what we've tended to do is more summarize it all up and put that at the front, and in the summary document that we put together that pulls out those key points. So rather than, because you in trying to explain things that are somewhat complex, it sometimes feels, and we've tried to do that, we've actually overcomplicated itself and confused people more rather than less. So the tactic, rather than explaining that technical stuff in detail, is probably to leave those as technical as they are required to be. And Karen Young, our auditor who's on the meeting, might like to comment on this too, and then summarise those things up in simple terms in the summary document as Richard has explained.
I wonder if I can comment on there through the chair as well. In terms of the current annual report, what we did this year was to break it up into sections and make those individual sections available on the website, as well as the summary document itself. That allowed people, instead of having to look at the whole report, could pick and choose exactly what they wanted to look at. And I note that we had over 2,500 people so far go into different sections of the report and either download or read it. So that's one thing we do track to pick up that point that Councillor Pannett made. Do people read this? We're seeing over the last 3 years an upsurge in people reading annual reports, probably for a variety of reasons, not just technical financial reasons, but also because it tells a story of the city. And it's one of the few documents that does for the financial year. So there are a number of things that we've done there in addition to what Andy has just said.
Thank you. And will this be flexible enough to take into account the effects of COVID when it's published?
Just answering that, yes, it will. I mean, obviously COVID will feature in this report, and yes, we will be looking at how we can do that.
Okay. And I guess for me, does it also highlight enough the big picture issues? So we've got some of the challenges which when we look at the risk report later on in the meeting, do you think we're picking that up enough so that people are seeing what the big challenges are and how we're responding to them?
I guess in the front end of the report, particularly in the Chief Executive's and Mayor's statements, and also in the summary, we talk about remembering the annual report as a look back rather than a look forward. However, we do in that front end of the section do talk about what's on the horizon and what's coming up, and that's where we've tended to pick up some of those particular issues.
Okay, and just my last question is around leaky buildings. Doesn't always get a lot of airtime, but obviously there's some significant issues here. So on page 106, we've got a structural defect claim, the defective product issue from MOE. And are you comfortable that our figures are reasonably robust about what our future liability is?
Perhaps I'll answer that, Councillor. As much as we can be. Obviously, we undertake an actuarial analysis, an externally completed actuarial analysis by professional actuaries every year that goes through and assesses on the information that we've been notified about and on local and national trends about what's happening in that space, which picks up both anything that's from a claim perspective, anything that we've got on the radar, and other legal aspects that might be coming in or into the realm. So we're pretty comfortable that the process that we go through in doing that is as accurate as we can get it, given the circumstances.
And are you confident that we can assure the public that we're doing everything we can in the consenting space to make sure that we don't have as many as we have in the past?
Well, that's probably a question for our consenting team rather than myself. But look, I think that we've had ongoing conversations in the sector about legislation and how well legislation supports us in doing that, and I think that within the realms of that legislation we are, but the legislation continues to be challenging in terms of where the legislation often tends to follow rather than lead.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And just we do have Karen Young from Audit New Zealand on here as well. So Karen, do you? And I know Andy Matthews suggested that you might like to comment on perhaps the initial question from Councillor Panet. Did you have anything that you wish to comment on at this stage?
Hello, Chair and everyone. Nothing at this stage in particular. I do agree that annual reports should be a comprehensive story about the financial statements and performance information of the Council, as well as putting appropriate context. The Council has worked very hard to ensure the document is readable and accessible, and it's an ongoing challenge which they continue to work on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now next I have First Deputy Mayor Free and then Councillor Condi for questions. Deputy Mayor Free.
Hi Karen and everybody. Look, I'm not normally on this committee, but I've always been interested in it. The thing that's worrying me a little bit, but and I guess it's a question for Karen really, is of course we are doing something a little bit extraordinary because of COVID. We're borrowing to cover our anticipated loss of revenue. Are you able to comment on whether how much that's seen as a reasonable response in these situations, the situation we find ourselves in, and are you aware of other councils potentially doing the same thing?
Other councils are reviewing their financial position, balance sheet, the impact of COVID-19 on their operations, which does include looking at their borrowing position.
Is it a reasonable thing for us to be doing? I'm sure it must be, but I thought at the time I'd like to hear from our auditors about it.
It is a reasonable approach, Councillor Free.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I suppose what we've got in front of us is how the draft report might look like from the financial statements perspective. So that might be another opportunity to talk with the Auditor General in terms of how we do finance going forward. Okay, Councillor Condi.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question in the paper on looking at paragraph 4 and in paragraph 11. In paragraph 4, it says that in 2019, after taking feedback from the reporting awards, we've established a structure that could be used for previous years, but then, for future years. And then in paragraph 11, it says no changes proposed to the structure from previous reports. And those just seemed a bit contradictory and left me feeling a bit confused about where we're actually at. So if we could address that for me, that would be really great. And I'd just love to hear what exactly the feedback was from the reporting awards and how we've incorporated it.
Could an officer address that, please?
That's probably Lloyd if he's online. Bronwyn.
Sorry.
Oh, Lloyd's back. Thank you.
Go, Bron. Sorry, I didn't catch the question. I broke up a little bit. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Sure thing. Hi, Lloyd. The first one was just that in paragraph 4, it says that we updated our structure of the report after the feedback from the reporting awards. But then in paragraph 11, it says that there's no change proposed to the structure from previous years. So that just seemed a bit contradictory. And I would just like to have that untangled for me, if you could. And then the second part of the question was just what was the feedback we had from the reporting awards and how have we incorporated it?
The last 2 years, the focus on the reporting awards has been more on the upfront section of the report itself. And we've put a lot more effort into the staff, the beefing up of the staff numbers, the HR numbers. That was the feedback we got. So that's happened. It's a continuous process for the annual report awards. What happens is that we submit, we get judged, Then we have a feedback session, which we've yet to have for this year. And as a result of that, we then look at, say, what we want to change, what we want to do differently, if anything. By the core structure, we mean in terms of the core structure of the report would remain the same, because we've had the feedback that the structure is fine. The focus is more on the content rather than the structure of the report itself. And that's where we'll continue to go. The feedback has been, you've got a good structure, there's no need to change it. So the tweaking is around the culture, readability, how we present it, use of graphics, and all of those sorts of things to improve that. And the focus has been on telling a bit more of our story up front, telling a bit more about what the council does, the people. We had a stronger people focus, visual people focus this time. So it's those sorts of things. So that's what we mean by that.
Thank you. I see Roy. Roy, you have a question? Oh, and you're on mute. Roy, you're still on mute. You'll need. Roy, we still can't hear you. Oh, yeah. Now you're off mute. Yeah.
That's right. Because I'm at the top, every time I move, something comes across in front of it. Anyway, it's rather a comment that the advantage of looking at these financial statements a couple of times already, and I would like to point out, of course, that these are just the financial statements, and a lot of the performance information appears elsewhere in the annual report. My view is that they've done a really good job so far, but I'd just like to know, we have a review process at this committee, but what are the internal review processes, Andy, that happen to ensure that we've got the best report?
So we do, and I suppose I'll split that into two sections, really. I think because one of the sections is obviously around the financial statements part of it. So there's ensuring that we've worked through and we undertake a comprehensive exercise each year to make sure we're picking up any and we do this actually almost effectively a year in advance, where we're picking up any changes to accounting standards, any other requirements that we have to make sure that our financial statements meet the legal requirements that we're required to meet. We also engage with our audit team, with Karen and Karen's team throughout the year, so that we're aware of any issues and potential, I suppose, areas which the OAG might be pointing us to as needing to, as their view, that need to be strengthened. And because it's interesting, while essentially there might be changes in terms of technical changes or legal changes, there are other more subtle changes that we might be directed or advised that OAG or audit would like to see us focus a little more on. And then the third aspect of that, in terms of our audit, our review, is the points that that Lloyd talked about previously regarding our entry into the Australasian Reporting Awards. And we do that not necessarily because we think we're going to win or want to win, but we do it as a good guide because it does provide an opportunity for us to be, I suppose, to be put up against other annual reports from around Australasia and receive that feedback, and then and continue to incorporate that feedback into our documents. So we're confident that the processes that we use in undertaking that are robust. I think the area, just on the final thing I'd point, the area of how you report performance in a council organisation which provides a massive range of services is always a challenge. And I think that performance measurement space continues to be the one where, where it continues to be challenging about how do you get that best, best reflected in the document. And we continue to work on that and modify that both through the performance measures themselves and in terms of how we report them.
And the performance measures we'll see, we see it before the September workshop. Do we see those earlier than that? Or we only get one bite at it? I suppose it's Lloyd should answer this one.
Yeah, sorry, Lloyd, I was just off muted again. Could you just remind us of the time frame for that?
It's Bronwyn here, through you, Chair. We compile the data as of end of June. It takes through to beginning of August to get that data verified and checked by all the business units. So the draft report is available for audit in August, but it also goes through the FARS committees. So some of the data is available earlier, but we prefer to wait until the entire document and that analysis is ready for presenting at the committee.
So the time we see it is sometime early September, and by the time we see it, it's pretty well, it's final.
Not necessarily final, Roy.
Well,
it's a process. We do have and coming back to your point before, we've got an internal process of ownership and checking around that. And also my team are really not involved in delivering actually any of the performance measures. So we're the honest brokers, if you like. Yeah. And we have a challenge process which sits around that across all of the performance measures across all of our services. So one of our roles is to check that and make sure that we challenge, and we do actually challenge information, whether it be the quantity or the quality or the processes behind gathering the information. We're in a constant challenge process by that. We would rather bring to you data which has gone through that challenge process after it's gone through that challenge process, because you then have the assurance and you're able to look at the big and fulsome picture. Before that, what you effectively do, if you bring raw information to you which hasn't been challenged, you may get the wrong end of the stick.
Yeah, okay. So you don't have a similar process to the financial statements where we see them with no numbers? Because I presume that if we looked at the performance measures with no numbers, they'd be pretty, wouldn't make much sense, and it'd be a waste of your time, to be honest, Roy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Okay, I think as aside, I have talked with officers about us outlining our forward work program for this committee, including any workshops, and I think we can take that on board in terms of how we can enable this committee to sort of have as much input into how that annual report will shape up, especially around the performance story. So we'll take that on board. Now I have Mayor Foster, if he's there. He's not there. He did have a question. I saw he's on the phone. Mayor Foster, I think you had a question.
Yes, I did. Sorry, and thank you. I just had another mayor deciding you needed to give me a call, so I thought I'd better take that one. My quick question was just in terms of the annual report, the COVID situation, because there's going to be a whole lot of our business which would have been tracking absolutely fine for 3/4 of the year, or for just shy of 3/4 of the year, and then it all goes to custom, and that will be for a lot of our CCOs as well. And I just wondered how we can properly reflect that because we can reflect that in two ways. One is to say all the numbers don't stack up, and at the end of the year the reason's COVID. We give that general response, or we could say first 3/4 of the year, the zoo, the Zealandias, the stadium, etc., were going absolutely fine. Our pools were going fine, etc., and then they dropped off a cliff because we weren't able to do any business. So I guess I'm just asking: is there a way in which we can almost do a sort of 3/4 of the year report and then a quarter of the year report is 2 parts of the same thing. That's probably my biggest one, and the other one is just I assume that we're still fine in terms of our timetable to deliver all of this.
Yeah, so I'll have a crack at that first, Mayor. Look, I think that we've been thinking about that quite a bit ourselves, and effectively also about how we explain that from our, in the third quarter forecasting. So when you look at the quarterly report for the third quarter sort of doesn't really take that into it, doesn't really reflect that. But when we look at our full year forecast, it does, and how we do that. I suspect that we won't do exactly how you suggest by trying to split the third quarters and the fourth quarters, because the way that we report doesn't allow us to do that easily. But what we will tend to do is, as we work through the various aspects of the report, we're going to attempt to isolate the impacts of COVID. So, which effectively has the same impact, but we'll be isolating those in the areas where it has most impact, and as we've discussed in our earlier reports through to council, that's mainly in the area of non-rates revenue, and a little bit yet to be seen, but and a little bit in terms of increase in debtors forecasts with the rates deferral option, recognising though that they're not due till 1 June anyway. So, but those are the two key areas. So we'll isolate the comments where we need to reflect them, and I think the other key important thing will be to make sure that we're adequately articulating that in the narrative up front. And we've been talking a lot between the finance team and Lloyd's team about how we're going to do that in terms of the narrative as well. So we will isolate it, and we will be clear about what the impacts are.
Okay, so at the moment you can't see that isolation in the structure of the document, as far as I can see it. So yeah, because obviously this was a document which actually was pre-COVID.
Yeah,
so,
you won't see it structurally. Andy, I think that what we will actually do is it will more be in the notes to relative statements, because if you look at how you present something structurally, particularly from a financial statement perspective, it's pretty prescriptive. So it doesn't really provide you with the option to be able to do sort of 2 different sort of scenarios around that. So we'll be articulating those in notes to the statements in the relative spaces. You don't see those yet at the moment because we haven't really reflected exactly where they're going to be. So the proof is going to be a little bit in the pudding to their degree which we think it's material and worth reflecting in that various notes.
Just to follow on what you've just said, Andy, from a non-financial perspective too, we want to wait and see what the numbers look like coming forward. I suspect it's not going to necessarily be a one-size-fits-all. We may see different results depending on the different areas of the business itself. So we need to be just a little bit flexible around that, but certainly reflecting where COVID has had an impact. And where it hasn't, if that's the case. I think we're going to have to be a bit flexible around that, because whilst there is an overarching story around it, I think in terms of the individual performance area in the business itself, there'll be different stories.
Okay, one of the final thing I've got is that one of the issues we sometimes have is that we get relatively late. We get our CCOs come in, some of them later than others, particularly the jointly owned ones. Is whether there's going to be any issues around that, because they're going to be particularly having been impacted by this in terms of how they reflect the impact of COVID in their statements. And I think we're going to need to make sure we understand those properly and understand our own budget, our own statement properly too. So it's probably going to take a bit longer than it normally would do.
Yeah. Andy, we might loop that round on that in one of the later reports.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of officers? Okay, so look, we'll go into any debate and discussion on this paper. Heidi, did I move? Did I move the
You'll just need to move it first and then have a
Okay.
seconder, and then we go through into debate.
Okay. So look, I'm going to move all these recommendations as officers have provided. This is mainly, the template here is mainly on the financial statements. We do know that it's how we're going to tell the story, and in particular the performance story, and how we deal with the impacts of COVID is still yet to be determined. And I believe that this committee, in particular with our external advisors, will be able to add value into how that shapes up when we know more come August. So look, I'm happy to move these recommendations. Do I have a seconder? And I can't see everybody. So, Councillor Condi, are you happy to second? Thank you. Thank you. So, Councillor Condi to second. Is there any debate? Right, simple. Okay, are you all happy if we move the recommendations on block? Okay, all right. So since there's no debate, so I'll move them forward. Councillor Condi seconding. Could you please vote accordingly?
Just missing Mayor Foster.
Now, there's some way of voting which I obviously haven't got myself across, so I'm voting aye.
Great, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I declare the motion carried. Okay, so now we come to the health and safety report. Before we go to question, I'll just introduce this in terms of, again, it comes back to our meeting, what that was scheduled for March didn't go ahead, which gave us the past performance of around health and safety in the workplace. That report never came to this meeting formally. And what we have got is a focus, an in-depth focus on how this organisation has dealt with COVID-19 and ensuring our employees are working as safely as possible. But it is also important for us to look at our past performance, because that will enable us to think about what we need to do going forward, what improvements can be made. So I will be, as part of when I do move the motion, I will also be performing that we do accept, or we do accept the recommendations in the report that's been sent to you yesterday, and that was the report that was actually on the March agenda. So look, I'll hand over to officers just to take us initially through the COVID-19 paper that's in your agenda now, and then also talk about the report that was going to be presented in March. I'm not sure who wants to do it. Is Meredith or Paku?
Kia ora, we're both here. Before Paku starts talking to you through the report, thank you for that segue, Councillor Calvert. And going forward, you can expect not only a normal report, but also the dashboard for the following period. So thank you for bearing with us to catch up for the missed FARS meeting previously. And we look forward to progressing our conversation with this new committee around the evolution of health and safety reporting to FARS. With that, I will hand you over to Paku Edwards, our Health, Safety and Security Manager. And while we would normally have the quarterly view, we thought it was also incredibly important for you to understand what we've done through COVID-19, specifically in relation to the safety and well-being of our staff. Paku?
Morena koutou. So in terms of the response to the COVID event, we really needed to act quickly once we understood that we were going into a situation in terms of an emergency. So our process for the council was to gain to understand just what the risk was and what the associated hazards were in relation and in context of the council's response to the Ministry of Health-led emergency. So that was our initial thinking. And in doing that, we prioritised and focused our attention on the hazards that had the highest level of impact to our staff at a given time. So, so that included reviewing our controls and in some cases implementing additional controls to ensure that our staff were safe, healthy and well under these under this new, changed environment. Our first three priorities for this event were our vulnerable staff, and that was around identifying who was vulnerable, who had pre-existing medical conditions, etc., that we needed to keep safe, that we needed to act quickly to make safe. Secondly, was in terms of our essential workers, undertaking a quick assessment just to make sure that they were okay under level 4. They were going out and at that point, in a lot of ways, we didn't know just how big the risk was around the country. In fact, they were starting to collect information and really didn't know a great deal at that point. So we needed to really make sure that that their health, while they were out in the public, out and about, that they were safe. The third priority for us was our staff wellbeing. We knew that people were moving back into a different environment, not the office environment. So we needed to develop ways to wellbeing and in support of them in the new environment, especially being at home and also in terms of having to social distance. In all of this, I think we've achieved what we set out to achieve. What I've done is I've broken the report into the specific areas of risk and hazards specifically that we identified through this process. And then off the back of that, just what did we put in place? What controls did we put in place? What were in place? And what did we need to do to kind of support our staff to work in this new environment? So you'll see that we talk about initiatives around, keeping people safe around transfer of the virus, ensuring that they've got good hygiene, following Ministry of Health guidelines, etc. In terms of mental health and well-being, there are a myriad of different wellbeing initiatives that we undertook, but a couple of the ones that we felt were really necessary were that was the continued messaging around if they needed support, there was support available to them. And the other one was around daily wellbeing checks, just making sure that they were able to kind of make contact with us if they needed, or with their managers if they were struggling in the new environment. We also went out to staff 2 weeks later just to see how they were. So we did the feedback survey, which told us a lot actually, and provided us with lots of insight in which we could support them. But by and large, they felt that they were being supported from a wellbeing perspective. From musculoskeletal, this is where, because you're out of the office, you don't have the equipment that you might have usually use. So under this area, we were ensuring that we had identified some of the equipment they may need, and in fact we delivered equipment out to people, 130 office chairs, etc., just to support them working from home. There's a couple of other areas that we are currently concerned about as we've gone through this the event, and that's working extended hours. And of course, throughout this time period, we've always been concerned about security breach, and that's around our assets and also our people in terms of those that were essential workers, etc. So really that's the report. There's a lot of information in there, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is, thank you, Paco. We will, if we could focus on the COVID part of the paper, and then perhaps move to the general report that was tabled back, or that was on the agenda for back in March. So, any questions? Can't see anybody. Can't see anybody's hands up. Obviously, Paco's given a very excellent explanation, but I do have a question. And Paco, you did talk about sort of some of the the issues coming to light now. Sort of working extended hours and maintaining the security of our assets. Are there any other, or specifically any other emerging issues that you would like to comment on?
Yes, look, one of the things that dropped off over this time period were people actually accessing EAP and our EAP services for support. So I think as we return back to work, an emerging risk for us is that people will need that support actually, and what we'll find is in the environment they were at home, they not necessarily would have accessed EAP. And that counselling service. So going forward, our emerging risk in terms of this event is we need to make sure that we have that provision for them to access and support them at work. It's going to be interesting how they come back into the workplace and how they respond coming back into the workplace. So I think that there will be an increase in people accessing EAP and those counselling services. Yes.
And in terms of, obviously we want people to come back in and when they are in the office work, that they're not coming in when they're unwell, whereas they may have done that previously. And sometimes the drivers behind that might be the availability of sick leave. Has officers given any thought to that?
Yes, so what we have, we've actually created a reinduction process for staff coming back to the office. And some of our key messages, our definite key messages, really clear is that if they are unwell, they have a cough, it's automatically stay at home. Don't put others at risk, don't put yourself at risk. Yes, we've provided huge messaging around that. And people know that they can, they've got the ability to stay home now in terms of sick leave, etc.
Before we move to Councillor Rush, who's got the next question, I saw your hand go up, Meredith. Did you want to add a comment?
Yes, please, Councillor Calver. I just also wanted to say that we recognise that with lockdown, increased pressure around drug and alcohol use could be an outcome for all of New Zealand, not just our organisation. So we're continuing with education around that, and we of course have our policy in place. We're also mindful that domestic violence has risen nationally during this time. And while we had the heart system in place for any staff to reach out if they were unsafe, we're cognizant that they might not have done that and that they could be coming back to the workplace and requiring that additional assistance. So these are things that we are continuing to keep a very close eye on and make sure that we reach out, as well as have the support in place for our managers to deal with it if their staff come forward. And equally that we continue to educate our staff on both things.
Is this likely to be, you've obviously got a budget for this type of funding, in particular around EAP. Are you comfortable currently that there is sufficient funding available to provide the necessary support?
Where there has been increased costing relating to COVID-19, we have made sure that we've noted that in the cost centre. And while we may exceed the EAP budget for this year, we're not concerned.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rush.
Yeah, thanks, and congratulations to the team over this difficult period. Really like this, the dashboard. But I'm just trying to understand. So what I'm seeing here is, by and large, an increase in the number of critical hazards reported. Is that, am I reading that right? Over Q2?
Yeah, Councillor Roche, what we've done is we've just focused on the COVID part of the paper, and then we'll get officers to walk us through that dashboard and the other aspects from March, if that's...
Yeah, okay. Well, obviously Q2 includes the COVID, but yeah, we can park my questions on that.
Is that all right? Then we'll come back to, we'll let the officers take us through that report. Councillor Condi?
Thank you. I was just wondering, Meredith, a number of our staff might not have good access to email and internet and those things when they're in lockdown at home. What did we do to try and reach out and support those staff who might not have had that easy access to those electronic forms of keeping them in the loop?
Kia ora, Councillor Condi, and thank you for the question. And we were very mindful of that during that period of time, particularly for our operations staff who don't necessarily have that log-on access. So while it's still electronic, we did make certain pages available on our website just for staff, so they didn't have to log into our system. But equally, our managers kept very close dialogue and regular contact with staff throughout that period of time, and it was one of the areas that was covered in the surveys that went out, whether or not staff felt that they were being contacted enough and kept informed, and it came back as very favourable. Comms continue to also look at various ways to reach out to staff, and for those staff who don't necessarily have a WCC email, we gained permission to get their personal email addresses and use those as another means to reach out. And Smart Council are continuing to look at an app as well that all staff will be able to download even on their personal phones, because the majority of us do have electronic devices. But I do hear you, and managers have played a massive part in making sure that staff were informed throughout this entire period.
Thank you. I wonder now whether we could go back to Paku just to take us through the report that was on the March agenda, and just talk us briefly through that.
Briefly through that, yes,
yeah.
Of course. So, councillors, I am just going to point to some of the areas where there have been increases or exceptions. So we'll just go straight to the personal confrontation. We've had a slight increase in numbers of incidents there. The personal confrontation is a really interesting hazard, in that our staff, parking staff that are city housing staff, they're dealing with customers that aren't terribly happy receiving tickets, etc. Equally, at city housing, they have staff with complex health issues, mental health issues, etc. So they will always have that element of hazard associated to the work that they undertake. Look, we support them through training, through we call management of actual and perceived aggression training. We undertake identifying hotspots, and we provide them with personal alerts and devices to help them assist them to flag when they are in trouble. We also buddy up staff in a particular hotspot, or with a particular if there's a troublesome customer. So there are things we put in place around that. In terms of our vehicles, we also increased in numbers of incidents, and what we found is that actually these are private vehicles that have either hit us, or that there's been an incident that our staff member has gone to assist with. So it's not necessarily our staff driver behaviour that's the issue there. In terms of our asset failure, we have had an increase in these incidents, and really these were associated with our moves to Kaiupoko and Tahiwi. So just ironing out some of those premise, moving into a new premise, a few more issues coming through. The lifts, for example, springs to mind, and we had some issues around that. And in terms of health and impairment, we had increase in muscle strain injuries. And really, this is a seasonal thing where we do have the gardeners that go through during the spring season, and they experience a lot of the muscle strains, etc., with the extra growth as well in grass with gardeners, etc. So we put in place early intervention, physio, educationals, etc., for those staff. So whilst we have had increases in numbers, we do support our staff with particular things that we put on for them to make sure that they keep safe. We've had an increase in near miss and first aid incidents, and a decrease in publicly notified incidents, in fact. So there's no obvious reason that I can find here, but just to say that staff know to log public incidents into Risk Manager. And also managers and leaders are responsible for monitoring those incidents that come through for their staff, following them up and closing them out to make sure that they've closed the circle for each of the incidents that come through for their staff. We've had an improvement in annual leave, so our staff with greater than 25 days annual leave, that's decreased in numbers. This is a good sign. We want our staff to have that life work balance. So this is trending in a good way. In terms of our leading indicators, you'll see there's quite a raft on the right-hand side of the report. We put all our lead indicators where we've undertaken training, where we've supported staff through EAP, etc., and all of those lead indicators that that we're also interested in reporting. So that's there. There isn't anything really of note there, although we started the mental health first aid training, and that's been fantastic. In fact, we've had such great response from our leaders who undertook that training. They can now kind of pick up on those early warning signals or early signals that their staff might be under some pressure, some stress, something going on in their lives. So that's a great thing. In terms of ELT, in terms of due diligence, I'll just touch on our counsellor visits. So we've had a bit of a bumpy start, but actually we managed to get 3 site visits in this over the time period. And this included actually several of you heading out to the southern landfill, and one of the roads, Palliser Road, it was a site out, a transport site where they had contractors there. Now listen, if you do anything, the site visits are a great way of connecting with the hazards that our staff face day in, day out, and it gives you that greater depth of understanding of those hazards. You can have those conversations with our staff. So really, we are heading into restarting those now that we're heading out of COVID, but I recommend, if you want to cover off on your due diligence, the counsellor visits and ELT visits are really important. So yes, our EAP hours, there has been a large decrease. We identified an issue around this, and this is around staff accessing EAP over the time. And what it was is that we've found that there was a delay in the response from our provider. So we identified that early up. We basically acted immediately and ensured that there was the availability of an 0800 number. So where they would connect with their provider through website, we made sure that the 0800 number was also made available pretty quickly so that they could guarantee that immediate response. We don't want anybody not being able to access that support as soon as they need it. We hope that the lack of response hasn't led to the decrease in the numbers accessing EAP, but we can't rule it out. But what we are doing is we're reviewing the service that our current counselling provider is providing, and it looks like we may be looking towards a potential new supplier around counselling services. So, but what we have noticed in the EAP access, certainly in December, January and February, is that the numbers of people accessing EAP have come back to what they would normally be. So that's what I can say about the dashboard. Any questions?
Any questions, councillors, colleagues? Councillor Condi?
Thank you. Hey, Paku, thanks for that update. As Councillor Rush said, the dashboard is excellent. I just wondered if you could talk a bit, it talks in the dashboard about we've seen an increase in near miss reports and you know that we're encouraging people to make near miss reports. So I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about how we're encouraging and supporting staff for that reporting, because I think it's, as you acknowledged, it's really important that we have that data and we want people to be reporting it. And it was a similar theme in city housing where where the dashboard mentioned that the manager's been encouraging staff to report these incidents rather than normalizing them as kind of just an unfortunate part of the job. So if we could just, I'd love to hear a bit more about how we're encouraging that sort of reporting so that we're getting the data.
Yeah, thanks. So we ensure that we kind of communicate out to the organisation that near miss incidents, reporting them is important to us. We also go out to our health and safety reps to make sure that they are engaging in our staff to make sure that they report any near misses as well. In terms of near misses, it's really important data, and that's kind of the trick, is making sure that people understand the why. And so in terms of telling that story, we always tell them that actually that number of near miss incidents, when we've got that all collected together, it kind of points to a bigger problem. And so having that data is always important to us to be able to sort of see if there are controls that are actually potentially missing, that we've missed. So it's really in our communication that we get that information out there. We also have what we call a hero award that we sometimes, where people have gone out of our way. So what we have been doing is particularly looking for near miss incidents where staff have not been hurt, but have reported something that that could have ended up in a severe injury or health issue, and we're particularly looking for those so that we can hold these people up as a hero in terms of reporting. So there's kind of all sorts of different ways that we can do that, and that we are doing and seeking to do to highlight it. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett, and then Councillor Pannett first.
Okay, thank you. Paku, the waste operations truck tipping rolling forward, I'm sure you know or remember, there was a death at the Southern Landfill some years ago where a truck did move. I presume this is not a common occurrence, that people are very, very careful, and we're giving full support to make sure that people are safe.
Councillor Pannett, yes, look, listen, vehicles on off-road is one of our nasty 9 risks, and look, listen, any incident involving a heavy machinery, from our perspective, we focus on. So yes, we are always in terms of that. The other thing that we're looking at is our fleet procurement. So looking at through that lens is also important. So you know, our trucks, when they are due to replace, we're always looking for those trucks that have the technology in them that assist in ensuring safe operations. Also, off the back of that, we've got all of our staff that operate trucks undertake training that is is specific to the vehicles that they drive. So that's how we kind of manage that risk as well. But certainly it's a one of our 99 hazards that we manage. So yes, we have had a couple of incidents, near-miss incidents that have occurred, and we have got that we've worked through with our contractors, and we've undertaken investigations into those, and they will be coming through in the next report to you.
Okay. Yep. So, I mean, I take that really seriously, because that's when the worker deaths have happened in waste and water. So we need to be super cautious. And the so the second question was around the Safe Plus report. Do we want to be leading?
Yes. Quick answer. We do. And look, listen, we are leading in several of the areas that were pointed out. So the other areas, yes, we our vision is to lead in all of the areas rather than perform. So yes, we are working through some of these are cultural, like some of these recommendations actually take a wee while for our, because we're such a complex and big organisation, they take a wee while to kind of nail. So I just need to be mindful to nail some of these recommendations. They take a while, but we do want to cover them off and close them all out, and hopefully when we get them back through again, we'll be leading. Definitely.
Oh, it's a good effort. It wasn't meant to be a criticism. I was just noting that, and of course you are leading in some areas. So thank you very much for that. Well done.
Thank you. I'll have next is Linda Reaper and then Deputy Mayor. Linda. You're still on mute. Oh.
Yeah, right now. This might be a silly question, but does this dashboard include subcontractors' incidents and contractors working on council properties and sites?
Yes, it does, Linda. Yes, so all incidents that our contractors have, they are reported to the contract manager, and that's a requirement of us, of ourselves. So yes, we've actually put in there, I think you'll find with the incidents there is, it's broken down into staff members, and you'll see that there is an area there for contractors.
I think it's got public, tenant and worker, is that?
Right, yes. We have in the past broken it out into contractors as well. So, and then we've decided not to. So, I mean, we can do that, but yeah, this is an opportunity for you to kind of give feedback on the report if you think that that's a need, to kind of specifically know what the numbers are around the contractors. But definitely the report in terms of workers, that will include the contractors' numbers, definitely.
I guess just with the number of large construction projects that are around the place, it would be useful to just see how many incidents relate to council own staff and how many relate on those sites.
Yes, that's something we could consider, most definitely. In terms of the big construction sites that we do have, my staff do work closely with the project managers for those sites. So, for example, Town Hall is one site that we have complete oversight over. It's a small footprint and there's a lot of contractors and subcontractors working there. So we're very closely aligned with the project manager over that and have oversight of that particular project. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it's a very valid point, because often these sites being undertaken, we often have WCC officers visiting or even councillors visiting. So it's important that we're comfortable and we believe we're good practice in terms of health and safety around that. Deputy Mayor?
No, this is probably, Linda, I didn't think your question was silly at all. Mine probably is. I've been looking madly for the second half of the health and safety report, the one with the dashboards, and I can't actually see it in the papers. So was it emailed separately? Can I have it at some point? Or where would I have found it?
Deputy Mayor, I'll forward that to you now.
Thank you.
I think it was attached to the report if that's been printed out by you.
Okay, I've just been managing on diligence, which I'm still getting used to, and I've just been backwards and forwards and couldn't see it. So I thought
it was not. It's not on diligence. Actually, Heidi sent it out separately yesterday. Because
okay, all right.
We've added it in. It wasn't on the main agenda.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? I just have just one question. Actually, just going back to the Safe Plus assessment recommendation. So that assessment was carried out at the end of 2018. When's the next assessment due?
Yes, we're looking at another assessment in 2020, and this will be around the some of our a deep dive into it, some of our nasty 9 risks. So yes, 2020 this year.
And noting that report and who the assessor engaged with, a cross section from the organisation, would I don't know whether you engage with any elected members, but if they're not on the list, I think it might be good to add, that group. Not necessarily everyone, but certainly I think it would be, as we do have a due diligence obligation under health and safety. Okay, all right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rush, did you have any questions on the dashboard?
I didn't in the end, because I now realise that Q2 was the last quarter of the last year rather than Q2 in the calendar year.
Okay, thank you. All right. Since there's no further questions, I will move the motion now. Heidi, you better make sure I do this right, because as you know, we've also brought in the report from the 24th of March. So look, I am going to table that, formally table that report from the 24th of March. And Heidi, I need to move number 2 as a pro forma, do I?
That's correct. You need to move the entire motion pro forma as it's changed from the officer's recommendations.
All right. So look, I as very competent advice from our democracy services, I'm going to move these recommendations pro forma, because the officer's number 2 wasn't initially included. Is there a seconder? Councillor Rush? Okay, so now this is Heidi, just to help me through this, do we need to now debate recommendation number 2 separately?
You've moved it pro forma, so it's included. It's the substantive motion. You can ask for debate. If anyone wants anything to be taken separately, we can vote on them separately.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, as part of my introduction, I just want to call out our officers for their excellent work they've done in very trying circumstances. There has been no health and safety guide in how to deal with COVID-19. It's taken everyone by surprise. So given what we've seen, I know I've been came into the office today, and the operational practices that have been put in place, but also seeing what's happened over the last 2 months. I think we owe a large credit to our officers in ensuring that they are keeping not only our city as safe as possible, but also Wellington City Council staff and contractors. And whilst there may have been the odd little glitch, overall a sterling job, and all due credit. And from the questions that have been asked and the answers provided, I have a very high level of comfort that we are proceeding on the right track, and also showing, I think what's really important, the agility to adapt very quickly and deal with, in particular, emerging issues, because, as I said, there's no rule book around this. There's no guide. So thank you, in particular, officers, for this. But Councillor Rush, would you?
If I could just interrupt, I think you're going to need 2 seconders, one for the main motion and one for the pro forma. That's our standing orders.
Do I, Heidi?
Let me double check that. Won't be a second.
That wasn't a planned part of it, but we'll double check that. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We thought we'd sort of got it sorted.
I think under the new standing orders, you don't need a separate seconder, but that will be what Heidi's checking right now.
Should I say my piece?
Yeah, look, Councillor Rush, do you want to?
No, I just want to reiterate good work. I mean, it does give me a lot of comfort that officers were able to easily address questions asked, and it seems quite clear to me we've got a good system in place, but it's certainly no time to rest on our laurels. So well done, and pleased to second.
I'm just sharing the standing orders on the screen. Here we have that if if a member is moving a motion pro forma, they must specify the changes, and the seconder of the motion can support the changes introduced by the mover. I don't believe that we need a second motion to introduce this pro forma.
Okay.
I second the pro forma change. If that wasn't clear.
Diane, just if you're looking at that, if the motion differs from the officer's recommendations, that's where the pro forma comes in. This doesn't differ from the officer's recommendations, so I'm not quite sure why anything's pro forma.
It does differ from the officer's recommendations because recommendation 2 wasn't included in the agenda.
The officer's original recommendations, as opposed to what officers supported recommendations now.
Yes.
Yeah. I suppose what we wanted to do is try and get get both reports on the table to be debated, to be discussed, and so as long as we've I think find the way through there are standing orders to be able to do that. So I'll just move into debate. Councillor Condé.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank staff. I've been really grateful and very proud of all the work that you've done on mental health and wellbeing for our staff over the course of the lockdown. And I said this to you personally, but I wanted to also say it publicly. I've been really impressed and heartened by the work that you've done. And it seems like the feedback we've been getting from staff is that the work has really paid off. And I think now going forward, one of our great safety hazards is our staff's dedication, in that they've been working very, very hard for a long time, and we need them to take some time off so that we deal with some of those extended working hours. So we're going to have to find ways to tackle that and make sure that people are, after they've worked straight through weekends, they've worked until midnight to get things done during this crisis, that we now need to make sure people take a breather and recharge their batteries. And I know that you're doing lots of work to encourage that across our staff as well. So thank you so much. It's really made me very proud.
Thank you. Any other debate? Let's see. Any? Can't see any hands up. So look, it's not really a right of reply. You know, again, it's just a big thanks to officers, and I hope we don't see the annual leave level increasing, that officers do get the opportunity to take their break, but also acknowledging the extra hours that they have put in over the especially over the last couple of months, because we need our officers to be strong going forward, because there is we're going to have a number of challenges coming up in our city. So we do need everybody to be able to recharge their batteries. So look, I'm going to move these motions. Does anybody want anything taken separately? Everybody comfortable we do it all in one hit? Right. Okay, so look, I now put forward the motions that has been moved and seconded, and please vote accordingly.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so look, I know we 5 minutes before break, but I wonder whether we could just we've got the audit report, governing body report. Now, obviously, this is for the previous financial year, 18-19, and obviously, again, the delays, we're now really looking at it very close to the end of this current financial year. Before we go into debate, I will. We might take a break after this, but I wonder whether the officer could talk briefly about the report and the findings and what the council is working on at the moment. Is that Deb? Or was it Stephen?
No, it's actually probably me, Councillor.
Okay, all right.
So look, this is as the chair has said. This report comes to us after the conclusion of the end of the year. So it's effectively a wrap up of the I suppose the things that have been raised for consideration through the audit, things that which may have been recognised through the audit process, and that through the response that came from that, management go through and effectively agree with the auditors a little bit of an action plan, if you like, in terms of things that we need to follow up on. This report summarises that and goes through the areas where there have been sort of things that we've had to work through, where we've made comments and where we've made progress. I don't propose to go through it in detail. There are a small number of open recommendations. One relates to the procurement strategy, which we have had some discussion about also in other conversations with councillors, and so we're scheduled to have that policy obviously completed in terms of this year. So we've done that. We've got a draft, and so that draft is currently being reviewed by ELT in the near future. Karen, I don't know whether you wanted to make any specific comments on it. Otherwise, we can just open up for questions.
Thank you, Andy. I think a couple of comments from me through you, Chair. So the report sets out business risks and issues that have an impact for and on the financial statements and performance information, and they formed the areas of focus for our audit last year. So our findings included, we completed the audit and issued an unmodified audit opinion on the 25th of September. We found the council was well prepared for the audit, which enabled us to conduct the audit efficiently. This is a good thing. The control environment was effective and we're able to place reliance on controls where it was efficient to do so. We have noted that the Kaikoura earthquake in 2016 had a continuing impact on the Council's financial statements, and that included a further asset impairment of $50.5 million for the Civic Square complex buildings, an insurance recovery receivable for the Civic Administration building remained an unquantified contingent asset due to the uncertainties associated with the insurance receivable. These items have been accounted for and disclosed in the financial statements. As Andy mentioned, we were progressing with some work on procurement, contract management and project management. That work was due to be completed this year. However, COVID-19 has delayed the completion of our work. We are aware that Council has continued to review those three areas: procurement, project management, contract management, and that is pleasing to see. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, what I think we'll do is we will take a break now. I just have one very quick question before we go to break, Karen, and I seem to recall that this number looks a lot less than what we've seen in the past, in previous years. Would that be a fair comment?
This number, Chair, what do you mean by that? Sorry.
Or just the number of recommendations that are ongoing, that are current. I seem to recall that we seem to have a higher list of recommendations that haven't been closed off. Yeah.
In terms of the outstanding items you're referring to, aren't you, Councillor? That's quite right. We did have a number that I think were pending last in the previous year, and a lot of those have been cleared out, and the list is now relatively small, which is good.
That's great. Okay. Well, look, we'll take a 15-minute break now. We'll come back and then we will take questions of officers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget to turn your screen and sound off. Everybody got coffee, water? The only trouble coming back into the office is you bump into people and they end up wanting to talk to you.
Hope you don't get infected.
I've just done my hand sanitizer, got my coffee.
Oh, you're in the office, okay.
Yeah. No, I had to come in because I've got meetings either side in the CBD, so. Right, have we got everybody? We all ready to go? Okay, so we're up to the item 2.3 and questions. Roy? And then Jenny.
Really, this is obviously historical now, but I just want to be certain that even though it's been a difficult time the last couple of months, there's reasonable action being taken so that we don't get these items occurring again. I don't know whether Andy can answer that or whether Richard should. There's not a lot, but we don't want to keep having them turning up again year after year.
Is Andy Matthews there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am, Chair. Look, you absolutely take your point, Roy, and I think if you go back and look at some of the previous audit actions we had, I think some of them we ended up with quite a long list, probably through a little bit of lack of clarity and a little bit of disconnect, I think, in terms of what some of those issues were and how we responded to those initially when the original management letters came out. And so it ended up with quite a long list. I think that we've in recent times, we've strengthened that relationship with Karen and her team and are addressing far more things as we work through issues. And I think that, Karen, you might like to comment, but I think that's helping a lot too at keeping that list of sort of outstanding actions smaller and a sort of a quite a clear sort of, we're working through them as we go rather than sort of waiting to a point where you get to the end of the year and then there's a list following the annual report process.
Thank you, Andy. I would like to comment. I agree. I think the relationship we have with the council is very strong. Often when we raise recommendations verbally, council have taken action to put processes in place already, to the extent that there have been a couple of recommendations that we haven't had to report even because there's been quite good turnaround. I think the continuous conversation, dialogue, clarity, what is that we expect and would like to see has been really important, and council's been very responsive to that. So the list of recommendations and outstanding items is far shorter than when I commenced my time on the audit. We've been working with, sorry, Roy, I was just going to add your part about has things been kept moving during the lockdown period and as we've moved to level 3 and 2. Yes, they have, Roy. In fact, we are at council again doing our pre-final audit, and we've been talking to council about the COVID impacts. So we would expect to see more information around estimates, assumptions, use of management judgment, just because in some areas items may have moved due to the COVID environment and affecting things like interest rates. We do expect to see some more significant variance explanations. As the Mayor said before, it's a bit like our annual report in year of 2 halves. The first half of the year was trucking along really well, and then the second half of the year, COVID started to bite. The other area is around subsequent events. So some business risk or issues or government policy, council policies have been implemented, which means that there may impact on some items in the financial statement, some of them with a long tail. So we're paying particular attention to any subsequent events, and also the impact on the group. So a number of the CCOs are significantly impacted as they've been unable to operate during the lockdown. So these are the things we're asking council to consider, tease out, but we are also assisting council by discussing with them some practices which the External Reporting Board and the OAG have communicated to us in the sector as well. So it's been an ongoing conversation and dialogue during this period.
You actually answered my second question, Karen. Is well for this year's, you've given us a view of what the significant issues are. That I would have not expected any of those. Is there anything we ought to know from your current audit, or do you want to deal with that later?
So I think probably what I just said, Roy, and the impact. So the business impacts has a knock-on impact for reporting and accountability. So we're remaining very close to our clients. And over the lockdown, it has been business as usual to a degree, thank you to the likes of Zoom and working virtually, remotely. Even before the lockdown, we had been working with council to ensure most things could be done remotely by putting documentation in a shared file. We started that process last year, so we're just refining that now. It has worked very well so far. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's useful.
Okay.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks, Roy. Councillor Condie.
Thank you. Karen, I just had a question about one of the open recommendations from previous years.
Yes.
About the assessment of fair value of property, plant and equipment in a non-revaluation year.
Oh, yes.
And it just seems like there's still a bit of disagreement there about what the best way is to go forward in terms of the management comment. And I'd just love to hear about your point of view and whether you've shifted at all on that.
No, Councillor Condi, we've not shifted our view on that. Our recommendation, and there are two outstanding recommendations. One is in relationship to should be looking at recent council contracts and seeing what those costs and prices are. Management should be doing that because it is useful for them to have that information, and that informs how assets are managed and also future procurement as well. So really we believe it's highly beneficial. And secondly, to complete this technical accounting matter around review of fair value of assets between revaluations. Also, management should be talking to valuers about what information they have in our off revaluation year. So those two things will really strengthen the assessment. There is a cost benefit involved, so you know, we respectfully do see management side of things, but we continue to make that recommendation. It is particularly important this year with COVID-19, whereby operational land and buildings are being revalued. The valuer will need to post 30th June have a look at the results of the revaluation which completed in March and see if it needs to update those valuation results.
Yeah, because we've had a very significant increase in our revaluation of infrastructure during this financial year. How do you think that this policy recommendation would have affected that?
I guess it may mean that the assessment completed by management would have been more robust at the time, because using bill indices and even doing a loading on the bill indices probably still underestimated the value of those assets, and therefore has a knock-on impact for depreciation and other related items in the financial statements.
Would the would the size of the revaluation that we've had this year, would that have been considered a material difference?
So I'm not cited on what the size of the valuations are this year. We've not completed that part of the audit, Councillor.
Sure. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Condi, and really good points. And I think it's something to that we just need to monitor going forward, and perhaps ask some more questions about the audit for this year. Are there any other questions of officers? Councillor Pannett.
Thanks again for a good report. Andy, CAB, is this ever going to be resolved, or is it going to become like a musical?
We can discuss that in the risk report if you'd like, Councillor.
Okay. Just, or a soap opera might be more appropriate. And also definitely not being critical, but just around the water complaints, are we going to get a feel for whether those issues are being resolved? Like, I think it was said somewhere that like it couldn't actually be tested whether Wellington Water were following up on some of the complaints.
I'm not sure of the relationship of your question to this report, I suppose, Councillor. On a page
189.
Yeah.
We were unable to select a sample of complaints and test that these have been sent to Wellington Water and addressed. So when are we going to know that?
Okay. Yeah, we'll look back round with you on that specific recommendation. I don't know, Barbara, whether you want to comment at all on that, on the process around that at this time, but I think that it's probably best for us. If we can cover some of those things off in the risk report in that risk section, that might be a good time to wrap those up generically, Councillor.
Okay.
I agree, Andy.
Okay. And so just confirming, the procurement strategy is going to go through at a political level, isn't it?
Yes, we'll provide you with it. It's not something that the policy bit isn't something that needs to be signed off by councillors, but we will bring that through to council once it's been reviewed and recommended by ELT. Yes, there's some the bit which I think probably on that is that's why we've still got some bits to work through on it, I think, is the relationship between the strategy and the policy and how that works operationally within council. And so there are some bits that ELT is just working through, and because that's got a little bit to do with how we operate structurally around procurement as well. So that's probably the area which I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty. But the areas which you are interested in, no doubt, and the bits that we have talked about previously, and there was an amendment put through in one of the previous council papers, that has been reflected in the draft of the strategy, and we'll be bringing that through to council or to committee.
Well, I think some of us will definitely want to have a look at that to make sure that it meets our expectations in those areas. All right, thanks very much.
Councillor Rush, did you have a question? No, you might be him.
Diane, I'm going to need to duck out a little bit. Hopefully it won't be too long, and then I'll come back in later on.
Okay. Thank you. And we've already recorded your apologies as well, I think, for early departure, but hopefully we'll see you back.
This is the early departure for another meeting, but hopefully I'll be able to come back in.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so I see there's no, not that I can see any further questions of officers. So look, we'll move to the actual report. So look, I move the motion being the recommendations in the officers' report, and noting that we, from my time on this committee, that I've certainly seen a strengthening of the relationship between council officers and Audit New Zealand. So I move this. Is there a seconder for the motion? Roy, thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any debate? Any comments? Don't see anybody's hands up. Okay, well, thank you. I won't, there's no right to reply given. So look, I'll now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Would you please vote accordingly?
That's unanimous, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so now next to probably a very technical paper, and that's the update on public benefit entity accounting standards. I will, before we move the motion, wonder whether officers would like to just talk us briefly through this. Is that Richard?
That is Richard, away you go.
Right, thank you. This is a constant piece of work that we always go through. The team look through any changes in reporting standards that come through. It is, as you can see, there's a number that are coming through the pipeline, and the team have put together where we think the impacts are, and they've sort of rated them, whether they're minor, no real impact, or there's a significant impact. Sorry for all the jargon that's in there in terms of PBE and IPSAS and so on. They are just public benefit entities, and international public sector accounting standards are what they stand for. You'll see that we've got IPSAS 34 to 38, which are interests in other entities. We've done a review of that. We prepare papers and provide them to Audit to get them to see whether they agree. We do that prior to year end, so we can align our thinking with Audit to make sure the audit process in year end goes smoothly. We're saying for that particular set of papers, we don't believe there's any major impact. It's all around the disclosure of how we do that. And so that's for that paper. Probably the only thing that's coming up that we're still working on is IFRS financial IFRS 9, which is the financial instruments, and we're still looking at the impact of that. That won't come into force until 30th of June 2023, so we still got a couple of years to understand what the actual impacts will be. I'm happy to take any questions on this.
Any questions? It looks pretty straightforward. It is what it is. So yeah. All right. Well, I think Richard, you got off very lightly with this one.
Thank you.
Okay. So look, given there's no questions, I will move the motion in the recommendations in the officers' report. Is there a seconder for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Condie. Is there any? Would you like to speak?
Ever so briefly, just to say that I have a particular interest in the service performance reporting and I'll be interested to see how that develops with the new standards. So keep me in the loop.
Thank you. And is there any debate? Look, I'll now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. It's there in your papers. We'll take them as a whole. Please vote accordingly.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Moving on to our last paper in the public part of this meeting, which is a project governance update. Before I ask officers to talk to this, I'll just, especially for the new members of our committee, this is something that is certainly an evolving piece of work. It has been recognised that we didn't quite have the visibility from elected members around some of our key projects and also around the overarching governance of these projects. Often they would be reported back to through our strategy and policy committee or council, but generally at a 6-month, 12-month interval. So this enables us to take quite a comprehensive and cohesive look of our key projects. But it is, we are evolving, we're maturing, and I think you'll see even the report that's being presented to us now, which is slightly different to the one that was in the March papers. We are seeing slightly more information. I know there's some gaps, but at least we're starting to see the template. So officers, is this...
Diane, I'm happy to make some
you.
comments and then we can take questions. Really just picking up on your point, yes, we are on a journey and the report just gives a little bit of background on that. Perhaps just to add that Barbara talked to, I think, councillors perhaps the other day or last week about the development of a project management office as part of her changes within the organisation. So that's probably the next step of the journey, and that's going to reside in the infrastructure group, which makes a lot of sense given where a lot of our significant projects kind of live. So just picking up on your other point, yes, this report in effect is also within the quarterly reporting of the Strategy and Policy Committee, which is a quarterly look at all of the performance information, and perhaps in that context it's not so much of a deep dive into this particular report there, but questions do come up in that context. So perhaps here within the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee, it's more around the risks, and I know that perhaps previously this report has also been in public excluded because there could be questions that relate to some of the commercial backdrop to some of these projects. So perhaps if there are questions like that, we could deal with that as part of the risk report. So look, this time round, there's a bit more of a focus on COVID-19 because that's had an impact on a number of projects. We've colour-coded them purple for the purposes of this discussion so that you can kind of see that clearly. Andy will probably comment on the financial impacts, but probably at the time of writing this report, certainly not all of that's known, but obviously now in level 2, our construction's by the main restarted, so perhaps Andy might wish to just specifically identify those projects where that's the case. And then we can probably take questions. Andy, do you want to comment on things that have changed since this report was written? I think you might be on mute there, Andy.
Yes, I was, Stephen. Thank you. Look, committee members, Yeah, look, obviously it's evolving with the post-COVID environment. There might be specific questions about certain projects, but generally speaking, what we've probably seen is some reasonably quick ramp up in actually the projects that have started up again. So our thinking around the timing of when those projects might ramp up, we were thinking that might actually be slower than it has been, but to all accounts, the projects, the three major construction projects in terms of the convention centre, the town hall, and the St James Theatre are all back up and operating. Obviously, the thing which we're working through and determining at the moment is the impact of the time delays, and both from a timing perspective and more broadly from a cost perspective. There will be some cost implications with extension of time claims, etc. Under some of those contracts. So we'll be working through those with our engineers to the contracts, and bringing those back to you in the next quarter's report. In terms of timing and time delays, I think the project which we have the most significant level of time pressure upon is the St James Theatre, and the COVID impact is likely to have some impact on that, and that's probably the project which we are giving the most focus around those timing issues. And again, it's a little bit early to say specifically what that will be, but that's probably the one that we've got most significant focus upon, given the other two projects have a slightly longer time period, which also allows a slightly longer period to be able to get to recover, if you like, then, and get that time back. The complexity with the St James project is it's in two parts. Effectively, there's an earthquake strengthening construction part of the project, which effectively needs to be completed generally first, and then we've got the services upgrade part of the project. So the risk here is that the time delays caused by the earthquake strengthening part of it end up sort of constricting and putting pressure on the services part of the project. So that's what we'll be having the most interest in, and getting close across with both the contractors and our consultants on that project over the next month or so, and we'll have more to report back to you on that in due course.
Thank you. Now, given that this is something relatively new and something that's in its formation stage, I wonder whether the chief executive might want to sort of just generally comment about how she sees this going forward or maturing.
Yes, I just want to say hello to all of the new members of the committee, and I think this is the first time I've attended this committee as the chief executive, albeit that I'm sitting in my lounge at home, this great technology. So Stephen alluded a little bit earlier on to a number of changes that I'm going to make in the organisation, which are designed to do two things. One is to make sure that we are organised in alignment with the current strategic priorities of our council. And second is to address a number of risks we see in the organisation where we can improve the way we operate internally across a range of functions that are important for the support of the business and our service delivery. So one of those is, and it's not new, I haven't invented this idea. We've been working on some of these things for some time, but one area is the way in which we oversee the delivery of particularly significant projects, the way we oversee that, monitor it from the very beginning of the process through to delivery and post-evaluation. And what we have in Wellington City Council at the moment is what I call a decentralised approach to that. And that doesn't mean that a centralised approach is ideal in all cases, but one of the things that we are doing in the change we're making is to establish a project management office. Its job would be not to control from the centre, because that often also creates an unwieldy situation, but to be an office where we build the skill sets and support to work alongside managers in the organisation who are responsible for important projects, both large and small, because significance isn't always about size and scale, to provide a client service and support to ensure that we have effective project management in place, that we have effective governance in place, and that our systems and processes are wrapped around project delivery are consistent across the organisation. So some good work has already been done on that, and this is just taking it to the next level of maturity in the organisation to ensure that we are focused on effective delivery. And I think one of the things that I certainly picked up when I came into this role is the importance of delivery, and particularly for the recovery of the city in a post-pandemic environment. But it needs to be delivery that is cognizant of the risks that we are managing, the way in which we communicate with our governing body, and the way in which we work with our auditor.
Thank you, Barbara. What questions are there? Councillor Conde.
Thank you. First, just a bit of a plea, given that this is a new report. I don't actually know what some of these projects are by the titles that are in here. So even just a little bit more information. I particularly have sympathy for our external members who aren't as up to speed with all the details as the councillors are, because we're here all the time. So I think it would be really helpful if we could just get a little bit more, not too much more, but just a little bit more information about each project so we know what they are. I did have an actual couple of questions. In the project on Town Hall, it talks about the project board membership is increasingly important, and there's an interim approach being put in place. Could we hear a bit more about that if it's appropriate in this forum?
Yeah, I can comment on that briefly, Councillor. So in terms of, I suppose, to one extent, we've actually had a pretty strong structure in place around that project from the start. So what we've done in recent times is we've actually included in that project an external project expert from PwC, who's actually participates as an ex officio member of our governance, effectively our internal governance board for that project, given its scale. And in addition to that, obviously what we need to continue to manage is how we're going to manage the internal project governance for those projects as we go through transitionary arrangements with senior members of council, including myself. So that's so what we've done at the moment is we've put in some other temporary arrangements with those projects where Danny McComb, who leads our who's leading our work on the convention centre project, is also coming across to work with me in terms of internal governance around that town hall project, pending the appointment of the new infrastructure director, which Barbara has talked about previously, and the new CFO, which will come into play in coming months.
Thank you. And I just had one other question that was about the sludge minimisation project. So this is obviously a really important project for our waste minimisation goals. It's kind of the one that we have to get done before we can make progress in other things. And this is the first time that I've seen anything about a risk that Wellington Water won't be able to confirm a solution in time for the LTP. So could we have that, again, appropriate for this forum? Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Yeah, I'm not so sure we've got anybody online at the moment who's probably well equipped to answer that question for you, councillor. So I suggest that we loop back round, and more than happy to provide a response back to the members of the committee generally about that.
Sure, thank you.
Can I just maybe speak to that? I know that we are expecting some recommendations in September, and it has been concerning me that that might be a little late for what we need to do for LTP.
Thank you.
I think the one thing I would add is that I know we have lost some significant time because of the pandemic, where Wellington Water had to move away from, its strategic planning process, as did we, to emergency response, and that may be part of the issue here. But as Andy said, we will follow up. But our purple indicators here kind of show that that's the case for a number of projects at the moment, unfortunately.
I do have a question of Barbara, and it's something that's sort of come to the fore in the last couple of days. Do you see, how do you see our council having oversight of projects that or significant projects that may be being delivered by our CCOs? We've got Wellington Museum, looking at strengthening exercise subject to funding. We know we've got Wellington Water with the reservoir, and how do you see that sort of governance fitting into, if at all, into your structure?
It is an interesting question, because if we take a project like Omaroro, for example, which you are considering in the next couple of weeks, it is a significant funding. It requires significant funding from Wellington City Council. There should be a monitoring program in place and agreed with our CCOs about significant projects, recognising, of course, that council-controlled organisations are also independent legal entities with their own boards, and they will also be undertaking their monitoring. But I would say that between Wellington City Council and our CCOs, an holistic view of significant projects across all of our delivery mechanisms will be important for the council. So we will be working on integrating those things into our reporting in an appropriate way.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett.
Thanks for this. And look, obviously this is incredibly important, so thank you. This is a useful report. Possibly a question for you, Barbara. Yes, the sludge project is extremely important, but I don't want this being the be all and end all, and I've spent a lot of time arguing with officers about this. Other work must be got on with now, in terms of, and that's why the business case was escalated for the resource recovery park. Otherwise, we're going to be years down the track and we won't have actually done anything to put up the alternative infrastructure. Are you comfortable with that approach? Because it has been a big sticking point.
So, Councillor, the approach exactly you're referring to?
Which is basically the staff have said we have to deal with the sludge and then we can deal with everything else. My argument has been now for some years that that's not the right approach. We'll be years down the track. We are supposed to have cut our waste by a third by 2026. It wasn't aspirational, as one of the officers said to me. That's not true at all. It was supposed to be done. So I just want to make sure that we are working quickly.
So I'm
sure we're going to get with your restructure, we might get some more progress, so that will be good.
Yeah, so look, I do have the strong message among a number that waste minimisation is very important for our council. And I think I think we have a pretty good understanding, notwithstanding the fact that you're yet to go into your long-term planning discussion about your strategic outcomes for the city moving forward, that we understand those things that you are anxious to see progress on. There are some risks, and it's pertinent to talk about those in this meeting. There are risks, of course, in delivery and in workload, and a need to be careful that we are prioritising effectively together, particularly exacerbated by the fact that we are still going through what is an unprecedented global pandemic. It has had an impact on every kind of organisation in the country, including local authorities. And I think that doesn't mean that it should stymie progress, quite the opposite. I think what it probably means is we have to become even smarter at the way in which governance and management work together to clarify a prioritised approach to those things that are most important for the recovery of our city. We are working on a pandemic recovery plan, but ultimately the key program and process will be recognised in the long-term plan. In the meantime, there are a number of priorities that are there, and they were there before we went into the pandemic. And I'm looking forward to a conversation with the council as your new CEO about my KPIs over the next year, and where we would agree we put the emphasis and effort. But it is true to say that the changes that I'm making in the organisation are all geared to enhance our ability to perform and deliver in an environment where I know that there has been frustration about delivery. And while I can't comment explicitly on the concerns you raise around sludge and the order of things, without talking further to the staff, I have certainly heard the message that it's very important to you.
Okay. Next one, the earthquake-prone buildings. Look, I kind of get that this is from an organisational perspective, but I don't want us to be complacent. Yes, we have to issue new notices and all the rest of it, but we've got to keep our eye on the big picture, which is we have still got a large number of buildings which are earthquake-prone, and the notices are coming up soon. So can someone just talk me through why that's been given a green light?
Andy, is that something you can speak to?
Sure. Yes, certainly. Look, I think the green light at the moment probably represents the fact that in terms of the actions that we had currently agreed in terms of the project were progressing appropriately. I know, Council, that we've had discussions that we should be doing more and different things. Effectively, though, at the moment, those more and different things aren't reflected in our project work program. What this is trying to do is articulate progress about agreed projects and things that we've actually got funding and initiatives underway. I think that the discussion and the things that you're raising are valid, but are valid more in a planning context than in a project delivery context at the moment. So that's the difference, I think, between what this report's trying to say and the point you're raising. I agree with the point you're raising, but it's a different context, I think, in terms of the way this is expressed in this document.
So I guess, look, that's fair enough. And I guess that's where my concern is that we do take the broader picture in when we're looking at some of these areas. And I appreciate we don't have control over lots of things, but I do think we need the bigger picture.
Yeah, and
many of them.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And that the point there, I think, is the criticality in being really clear about what those priorities are as we get into the LTP process and articulating what they actually mean in terms of deliverables in a sequential timeframe. And I know in the committee or council meeting at some stage in the last week, we'd actually talked about how we deliver, how we incorporate projects into the LTP, and how we give clarity about the stage and certainty around those various aspects of those projects, and where we're clear about what we're going to deliver and how much it's going to cost, versus what we've got in there as a holding number for a project into the out years. And I think as we move into the LTP process, that will be a particular focus for council. And the aspect that you talk about, I think, is one of those which we need to be thinking about in terms of those additional initiatives in the space. What are they, and what do they mean in terms of projects we need to gear up to deliver on, and be explicit about that, so that officers and governors can be clear about what the deliverables are.
Okay, and last point around the library. I appreciate we've got a paper coming very soon, but I will be keeping the pressure up on that one. You know, if we were going to prioritise, it would definitely be right up there. And, you know, again, putting the green there does make it look like, you know, things are possibly a bit more on track than some of us might ideally like.
Yes, point taken, councillor. And again, I suppose the response to the last question probably is also relevant in terms of this space, in terms of where we're at, in terms of the process and the projects as we've agreed to them at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rush.
Yeah, thanks. So as portfolio lead for infrastructure, I'm very excited to see this type of group forming, I suppose, and it seems familiar to sort of groups that were present in organisations I've worked for. I'm just trying to understand how this group and someone like myself will interact. So I'm assuming I wouldn't sit in this group, but is there an elevated level of reporting to me on matters affecting, for example, water? And I'm trying to also understand to what degree this group will result in some sort of difference to the status quo. I'm just trying to understand. Barbara, I think you mentioned at one point you were hiring someone to lead this type of group, or adding some capacity at ELT in the infrastructure space. Is that kind of happening, or?
Yes, so councillor, I'm really sorry I missed the very first part of your question, sidetracked by something on my phone.
Yeah.
But yes, in terms of the change in the organisation, there will be a chief infrastructure officer on the executive leadership team, alongside a chief planning officer. The chief infrastructure officer will therefore at the top table have a key focus on obviously on major infrastructural services projects and programs, including the project management officer I talked about earlier on. Whereas on the planning side, we take an integrated approach to the early phase of projects, which is, you know, the early strategic planning stage. Was your question particularly about how you within your portfolio capacity are well informed? Is that your question?
Sort of, Barbara. Is basically how will this group work with someone who has a portfolio like mine, which is heavy in, you know, relevance to what they do, and how will that differ to what we have now?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, this portfolio question, because and I think it's probably a bit of a conversation about what it means from a governance perspective, and what it means from a management perspective, and then how the council as a whole fulfills its obligation to govern and monitor across all of the activities of the council. I think the secret with portfolios is that you have a good working relationship with the senior executive who is responsible for the particular area that your portfolio relates to, and that you do what I think we've been trying to do, which is to accommodate regular meetings, a no surprises approach, to keep you informed at the appropriate level about how things are progressing. And I'm confident that that can continue and will probably be enhanced with the changes that I'm making for you in particular and your interest in infrastructure.
Barbara, perhaps could I just add a comment that hopefully will help? I think it's about the different roles and responsibilities of this committee versus a portfolio holder. So, you know, when you see this report here, you know, in normal circumstances, there shouldn't be anything here that's a surprise to you, Councillor Rush, because there would have been a conversation with you through your portfolio responsibilities. But what this report does, I guess, is bring everything together in the one place around our significant projects. And for this committee, it's really looking at it from a risk perspective and looking at the kind of mitigations and asking those questions about, you know, the entire kind of portfolio of projects. At strategy and policy, it's more a question about performance. Are things on track? What does that mean, the overall scheme of things for the entire performance of council and where this fits in? So I hope that helps. It's probably where, as Barbara mentioned, we're, you know, kind of in this on this journey, and with COVID-19, it sort of got in the way of these conversations happening. But let's just say next time this committee meets in September, you should be well across these kind of highlights or lowlights, depending on where things are at, coming into this committee in terms of your portfolio responsibilities, and that would be the same for others as well.
Okay, thanks. I actually think sludge minimisation actually trumps natural resource park, by the way. Iona's not listening.
Thank you. Look, I just got a final question, and it's really, I see this project governance report is very much currently really based on this sort of, have we got the right internal controls around our project governance? But I do see there is a strong, you know, risk management element to this, and obviously this can be discussed under risk management. But this particular committee is looking not only at the audit controls around, or governance controls around these projects, but also ensuring that we manage risk appropriately. So I wonder whether officers would be able to take those thoughts away in terms of with our agendas going forward of how best to cover off the how we control the internal audits aspect, but also how we look at the risks of these individual projects. Okay,
happy to do that.
Thank you. Is there any questions before I move the motions? Okay. So look, in terms of introducing this paper, I just would like to, in particular, note our Chief Executive's comments about, you know, what we've been trying to do is really bring the importance of delivery to the fore. You know, this is something I know on council that we've looked at. You know, how do we ensure that once we've approved projects, how do we ensure that they are on track for delivery? So, and noting that around this project governance is a way that we start building up our knowledge and our confidence level around that. Look, I also acknowledge that we've got senior managers transitioning, some moving out, some new coming on board, and that's obviously something that we need to make sure, you know, things don't fall through the cracks. Councillor Pannett made a number of good points, but I think what it does is highlights that there is a piece of work that we do need to, how do we prioritise projects going forward? This report contains a whole list of projects, but especially given COVID-19, it is really a BAU list that probably existed prior to COVID-19, and it shows that there's even a growing need that we really need to ensure, you know, where should our priorities be? We won't be able to do everything, and we won't be able to do everything on the current timeline. And so that's obviously a broader conversation to be had with all elected members, but it is important for us as a committee to have that determined so that we are able to ensure that the, you know, our terms of reference, we can discharge those appropriately. And yeah, and understanding the criticality of some of these projects as well. So look, I think officers have taken on board the, you know, obviously, as it was noted, this is a maturing journey, and obviously some of the information in the reports will need to be expanded on. But I'm happy to move the recommendations and wonder if I have a seconder. Councillor Roche, do you wish to speak at the moment?
No.
Okay. Is there any debate? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I will now put forward the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Would you please vote accordingly?
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. So I declare the motion carried. Now we are moving into public excluded. And now, Heidi, guide me through this particular part. Do I need to, in terms of having Karen Young here, do we move into public excluded first before we?
So it's part of the motion. I'll share my minutes.
Yeah.
So it's part of the motion that Karen remains and that the public is excluded for the following items.
Okay, all right. Do I need to read it all out, or do we?
We can take it as is. We can leave this up on the screen if you like.
Okay. Okay, so I will move this motion. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Linda. Is there any debate? Thank you, Councillor Pannett. I expected you to
yes,
say
sorry, yes, I do. Look, I'm always a bit picky about this. The risk management update, I don't see why that needs to be in PE, and I think it's really important that we open publicly about the risks that we face, and I want to talk more broadly about how we deal with strategic risk. And some of the material, like around the council debtors, I'm not quite sure what's so sensitive. So I'll probably vote against it. I just think we need to be able to be as transparent as we can when we're debating these papers. Thank you.
Would any officers like to comment, in particular on the paper's content before?
Through you, Chair. Look, I think there could well be some discussion under the risk report that is commercially sensitive in terms of our legal update, and that's one of the key reasons for that report anyway.
Thank you. And look, I'm very comfortable that we have this currently in public excluded. Sorry, I have to still Councillor Condi. So look, I'll let Councillor Condi, do you have a question or did you want to enter the debate?
Well, I'm just sort of entering into the debate. Looking at the paper, I actually think I take Councillor Pannett's point that actually I don't see a lot that's in the paper itself that couldn't be released publicly. So I guess, but I also take the point that the conversation itself might veer into items that are commercially sensitive and might need to be made, may need to be in public excluded. I guess it would just be another plea to, look at some of these public excluded papers and think about when we can proactively release them, so that perhaps the debate happens publicly excluded. But is there really any reason that this risk management update paper couldn't be public later this afternoon or at some point? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think they're very good suggestions, Councillor Condi. Is there any other debate? Okay. Did I get it? Oh, I've got a seconder. Look, just I suppose in the writing reply, yes, I think we do certainly need to look at what information can be released if it is under public excluded. I think we also need to look at, in terms of these papers, in particular, around risk, how does that, we need to make sure we are being consistent with our information, and I'm thinking about the project governance report as well. So look, I take on board the comments by both Councillors Pannett and Condi. It is important that we are able to have free and frank debate, and particular on some items that may well be commercially sensitive or personnel sensitive as well, and that we have that opportunity to do that under public excluded, but certainly some of the outcomes could certainly be publicly made. So with that, I'll put forward the motion. Would you please vote accordingly?
So we have 6 votes for and 1 vote against, so that is carried.
Okay, thank you. So we now